Our first panel this morning is an absolutely fantastic one on a topic of real importance, of long-standing to the RSA, which is the role of arts and culture as a binding agent in communities. We have an amazing panel to my left. We have Melanie Abrahams chairing this amazing panel, so please join me in welcoming to the stage Melanie and the panel.
A very good morning to you, and welcome to the RSA Fellows Festival. It's so great to be here as well as part of the initial event, looking at ways that we can strengthen communities. So our focus is on the vital role that arts and culture plays in strengthening communities. And I'm sure many of you in the audience will have something to say about that, and we will be welcoming questions later on. This session brings together three extraordinary panelists whose work creatively empowers people and places. And my role is as a curator, a consultant, and a founder of Renaissance One. And for over 25 years, I've championed diversity and well-being through multidisciplinary projects. My name is Melanie Abrahams, and for me, it's important to celebrate community, creativity, and connection. So I'm delighted to be joined by Morag Myerscough, John Costi and Amy Vaughan, leaders at the intersection of artistic practice, community voice and cultural inclusion. And I just want to give a bit of background to the speakers. So in the middle here, wonderfully dressed, Morag Myerscough. Morag is a renowned artist and designer known for vibrant and large-scale public installations that energize communities and transform shared spaces. To my left, John Costi. John is a multidisciplinary artist whose socially engaged work reflects the identity, resilience, and rehabilitation, drawing from his lived experience. And to my far left, Amy Vaughan. Amy is Executive Director at Battersea Arts Centre, a leading figure for venue management and policy making and organisational change over several decades. And her career spans roles also at Arts Council England and the wider cultural sector as consultant, co-author and trustee. And I'm looking forward to what she'll be doing over the coming months. It's really great that you're here as an audience. Please let's welcome them to this occasion. What I'm going to do now, and in between I'll be probably pouring some water as well because we've just arrived, is I'll invite each of our three speakers to give a short 2-minute introduction to their work and their practice in arts and culture, just to set the scene, and their perspective on the role of arts and culture in strengthening communities. So please, if I could invite John.
I'm John. I suppose I'd start with, in 2007, I was arrested for 5 armed robberies and sent to prison. And while I was there, and I discovered art, it took that for me to feel like I could actually engage in it. And since coming out, I've studied and worked as a tutor and artist and social practitioner. I do a lot of crime diversion stuff with people in prison and coming out of prison, and work a lot with people that have lived experience, whether it be drug issues or criminality. Yeah, and I also have a studio practice, and I'm based around the corner at Somerset House.
Thank you, John. And Morag?
I'm Morag Myerscough. I work a lot on huge installations with community, and we build the work together. So, and my work is really all structured around belonging and understanding belonging, and how that works in this world that we live in now.
Thank you. And Amy?
I'm Amy, and I'm not an artist. I wish I was, but I'm not. But I am an arts administrator, which is really dull, but I love it. I kind of fell into arts and culture, I guess kind of through, I dropped out of school early, and it was the thing that I loved, and it was the thing that saved me ultimately, because what I was really good at was getting stuff done. and suddenly realised that here was this world that I could kind of make myself very useful in. And so my career started in youth work and youth community, using the arts to help young people who had dropped out of school, and went from there. And then somehow I ended up at the Arts Council, and stayed there for 10 years and had a wonderful time. I absolutely loved it, contrary to all sort of popular narrative about the Arts Council. I found it great. And now my bucket list organisation was always Battersea Arts Centre. So I'm delighted to have been there now for a few years.
Thank you. Such a rich background, all three of you. And I guess one of the reasons we're here is the value of communities is always important, but one could argue more important than ever with the kind of fractures and the traumas that have taken place over the last few years, including COVID, but also there have been layers of funding cuts and other inequalities kind of persisting. So I wanted to ask you, whether you're drawing on the perspectives and experience of others or on yourself, like what is the role that culture plays specifically, or what role could it play in addressing these systemic inequalities? Maybe if I ask Amy first?
I knew you were going to come to me first. I mean, I suppose I would see this from two sides, really. If I just think about it from the perspective of running an organisation like BAC, Battersea Arts Centre, sorry for the acronyms, is that when you're in an organisation like that, you're always thinking about what you're delivering and what impact you're having, and making kind of very, very careful decisions about how you are, I suppose, using increasingly smaller and smaller resources to have more and more impact. And so you're sort of stretching yourself thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner, and you begin to wonder whether you're actually still having the impact that this particular organisation was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or Battersea was 50 last year. And when we started to talk to people about the richness of that kind of, the intersection with the community that had happened over the lifetime of that organisation, you realise that actually the rocket fuel of the organisation isn't actually the money, it's the people, and it's the communities that it works with, it's the communities that step up and save it every time it might nearly be going bankrupt. Like, it's all of those, it's that network that it's part of, and it's just sort of reaffirmed to me that what an art space allows people to do, in terms of a physical art space, as in a big building sitting in South London, is that it allows a space for conversations that can't necessarily happen in other spaces, that feel difficult, that feel challenging, that feel joyous. It can be all of those things in one place, and I sort of struggle to think where else that can happen. And you can sort of intervene in different ways at different times, depending on what is needed by the community at that point. Sorry, that was a bit rambly, but...
No, that's wonderful. From a personal perspective, I live not too far away from Battersea Arts Centre, and as an 8-year-old, I used to play steel pan there. And as someone of Caribbean heritage, it was really important for me to have spaces that were safe, but also offered aspects to links to cultural heritage. There weren't that many places that would offer that, you know what I mean? And it was, and more recently, it's become like a sanctuary and an open space and a relaxed space, long before we knew about what relaxed performances were. So they've been very kind of groundbreaking in that. So yeah, I can definitely endorse that. And I think as well, in terms of your individual practice, either venues and organisations are drawn to you by your inclusivity, or you're drawn to them, because certainly from what I see of your work, you've been working within these spaces for some time. So thank you. Morag, would you like to respond?
Yeah, well, I like working on the streets, and I like taking over places that have been ignored for a long time, and but they could actually bring communities together. What I find often when I'm asked to do a project, it often comes from a city that has a community-based arts group, and they ask me, and they have really big ambitions, and then they tell me how much budget they've got. And then I say, well, it's not about paying me, it's actually whether we can physically make this thing that you've got this aspiration for. But because people have these amazing aspirations, I want to make that happen. And the way to make that happen is to get everybody involved in the making of the project and also sourcing the materials and things. And so when we start, if that's the situation, it's really important for me that everybody gets on board, and then we find ways of making it happen, and we do. And then people get what they want, amazing things, and I feel like I want to help them make those amazing things as well, and that's really empowering for them and for me as well.
Yeah, and I think looking at your work, I think you've mentioned that the aspect of problem solving is important to you, and I think that kind of aspect of being iterative or flexing the way that we problem solve some of these critical inequalities within our communities and society at large is also a really important skill and asset to have, as well as an impetus to have as well, rather than thinking that certain policies don't need changing and flexing and adapting to real life. Yeah, so thank you, Morag, for the work you do. And John, I was also looking at you've co-curated an exhibition last year, which was quite resounding and looked at different aspects of lived experience, and some of your work has been unfolding and exploring not just your lived experience, but the experience of others. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, most of the time I'm working in prisons and probation offices. So it's mostly with people that have been taken away from their communities, and often like very isolated, sometimes volatile people that maybe don't know how to express themselves and don't realise that art has many guises. So a lot of what I do is trying to convince people that art is an option for you to get this inner turmoil out. And so like yesterday I was working with a group of guys who have all just left prison, and every time we meet we say what they get from coming to the groups with me, and it's in a community centre in Stevenage, and we've wrote a play about their lived experience of the criminal justice system, and also housing, which is a massive problem at the moment. And I get to see them transform, and it's quite difficult to say exactly what that looks like. It's mostly they didn't speak at the beginning, and now they're all really excited, and they have found a community together. And there is a community of people who have healed themselves through art, but you kind of have to seek them out a bit. And once you meet them, I've got like a big list of kind of people who I think are on my team. We're all trying to prove the capabilities of art in terms of healing, and then there's other groups that I have to mix with in the art world who actually get really celebrated for their work, but it doesn't have that aspect or that element even considered in the execution of like an individual practice. So I think working in groups of people is the most valuable kind of art you can engage in, because I change worlds, but it might be an individual world, like and perspective. So in that, I'm really proud that I can lift the vibration and spread some hopefully joy.
Yeah, and that aspect of empathy and listening that perhaps you're giving to people that might not be expecting it or might not have received it. And we've been talking today about strengthening communities, and I guess it's important to note that some individuals won't have good experiences with their biological families, but they might find family and community through others, through arts and culture, through the different interactions they have. In terms of that aspect of finding family, finding community, could we maybe explore the aspect of what changes are needed in how the sector supports grassroots artists and initiatives? Because sometimes grassroots artists initiatives have been very much down in the pecking order of things. And also we do have to address, I think, that aspect of institutions versing individuals. Like sometimes there are individuals within communities who are really playing to their strengths and punching above their weight, you know, and sometimes we might undervalue their kind of contribution towards things. So if I could maybe turn to you, Morag, and ask you...
This was the hardest question. Okay, go for it. Let me see.
Okay. Well, what in your opinion would be any kind of changes that might be needed or useful in how the sector supports grassroots artist initiatives?
God, I don't think I can answer. I don't know enough about you know, I'm sorry, coughing.
Yeah. Or maybe from projects that you've taken part in, what were there sort of ways in which grassroots artist initiatives were being particularly championed or supported?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just always blown away by all the different arts groups that I work with through the country, and at the moment, up north, amazing groups of people who are bringing communities together, and I think, and the Arts Council is giving money to places now, much more than they used to those amazing people who are working so hard to make changes, because they are just right in there with the community, and they really know. When I've worked with all these different groups, they know everybody and everything, all the young artists and all the thing, and it's, you know, they bring everybody together, and that is a massive community, and then they go further out as well. So I think I'm not answering this question. So, but I don't know. I'm just really, I find it very emotional about the commitment that all these different groups of people that I work with have, and the energy that they have, and the time they spend. And it really is changing communities where, you know, there's a lot of unemployment and lots of other things happening. And then all these people come together, and when they come together, there's such a sort of joy, and because we're all coming together on a different level, a level that they weren't expecting that they would enjoy, and then they enjoy more than they think they do, and then that continues. But I mean, I obviously just jump in and out of these situations more, but I think that's a good thing as well. So I just sort of, but I take loads from it as well. I learn all the time. I'm working at the moment in Germany, and one of the biggest things that I think is one of the biggest issues is communities are separated out into different age groups depending on what where you are in your life. And the biggest thing I found is when you can put different people together, and how that enriches everything, and rather than keeping people separate. And so older people just love being around young people, and young people get lots out of that as well. And I did a word workshop with little ones to their 70s or 80s, and actually when you read the words that people all wanted in their lives, they were all the same. It was about love, peace, and, you know, being kind to each other, sharing, and that was over all the age groups. So because I think recently we've been all these Gen Z, this, that, we're all separated out, and actually I think the big thing is that we come together a bit more and forget about age. Just think about, you know, the human being, the person you are, rather than judging people by what they, you know, what you think about what on their you know, on their age.
Yeah,
I mean, you know.
Thank you, Maura. That's a lovely answer in terms of just the emphasis on coming together, people of different backgrounds, intersectionality, kind of working together, which again, you know, is reflective of the value of strengthening communities. And Amy, are there any aspects that you think, any changes in the sector?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just going to reflect on it from the perspective of, like, for me, it's too difficult to get the money, and then it's too difficult to evaluate and report back on the money. So, like, there's a cycle about how the funding is moving through the system, and at the moment, the process that you have to go through to get the minimum grant of like £10,000, £15,000 is incredibly difficult, and then when you deliver the project, you then have to report back on it. And I think if you're a grassroots artist, number one, a lot of, when I was at ACE, I had a brilliant experience there, mainly because I was working, I've grown up in the East of England, I was director of the East of England office, and it was a really brilliant opportunity actually to kind of like get in my car, because there's no trains in the East of England, and drive around and like, and I formed really brilliant relationships with places. And I can remember working in Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth, and the way I used to get their councillors, who were all on a very, very different political spectrum to me. You know, we were very far apart, but there was things that we could agree on about what those places deserved in terms of infrastructure, in terms of investment. And so we would just coalesce around those things. And if I could get Lowestoft to do something, I knew I could get Great Yarmouth to do it. Because there was a power in communities wanting to be the best versions of themselves and be able to say, well, you know, we're better than them down the road, you know. And so we sort of used to lean into that, but they never wanted £15,000. What they wanted was 10 500 quid grants that they could give out really easily without a huge amount of like bureaucracy and red tape around those grants. And so we used to sort of try and find ways in which we could find different, I mean, 10 years ago, there were a few down the back of the sofa pots of cash at the Arts Council that you could kind of like, all right, and you give it to the council, and then they give it to the local community action group, the community volunteer group, and they would distribute small grants to people. And that was so impactful. And actually things like that then became programs like Creative People and Places and you know, big Arts Council schemes. But I would even say those, they just by their very nature have become too complicated again, because they become they're successful, they become a big amount of money, and then that big amount of money requires significant justification of why the government should give the Arts Council that money to give out. So you just end up in this kind of cycle where people who are working directly with communities who need small amounts of money to get small projects off the ground that have huge impacts can't get at that money. And I think one of the things I'm really interested in is how we change. I can't change that application process. I tried for 10 years at the Arts Council. I was not successful. But I think in terms of figuring out what social impact evaluation looks like in a way that isn't incredibly academic and incredibly, you know, leaving too many people behind because of the language that's being used around it. Like, how do you ask people if they feel better because they've been part of a particular group for 6 months in a really simple way? And how do you give that to people that are running those community groups with those small grants so that they can just report back? And because I think you can then lobby the funders, you can lobby the Paul Hamlins, the ESMAs, the Arts Council to say, could you accept something simpler if we come up with an agreed language? So that's where I feel there's change that could be made, stop focusing on the money side, because I think that will come, because I think ACE do get it and there's an understanding that needs to change. Yeah. And this review might change that as well. But what's the other end? The reporting. Yeah. How might we change that?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Yeah. And that does, again, relate to aspects of inclusion and equity as well as process and many other things. Yeah. And John, are there any sector changes that you feel need to happen to support grassroots artists?
Well, I recently got my DYCP grant for the first time, and I would have never been able to do that without the access worker. Yeah. And in fact, kind of all grants, as someone who's grown up working class, even just the idea that you can put together this text and submit it for money, and that you don't have to go and lay bricks, or you don't have to go and exchange like physical labour for, or a painting or a product for money. I think that needs to be explained to people a bit better, like, because there's a lot of people that don't know about, like when I went to school, they taught us, you know, in order to make money from art, you know, you kind of had to die, and then your work would be valuable. And so for me as a teenager, I thought, well, I'm not doing that. Yeah, you know, I ended up going to prison, which is pretty close, but I think that idea that even I've got a friend who now is a talent scout, but they wrote a letter to themselves when they were 18, and they said that they wanted to be an actor, but that was the only job in the industry they knew, you know. So I think there needs to be, maybe in secondary school or at least in colleges, some information about how you might be able to do that, because it took me a very long time and a lot of help a lot of help. That I would have never been able to do that on my own, to cost every hour. That's something that I've never attempted. So I think just access to that information and the grant workers are, the one that I had was great. So and time, you know, time. If I did a project in Jaywick, which I was kind of shipped out to Jaywick as this cultural sort of feeder in a way, and I thought it was so problematic to me that you've got this stranger that's got an art degree that's going to land in the most deprived area in Britain, and I'm going to give them something, but the fact is these people have already got what they need. It's more about the shift in perspective that a lot of what working class people have, that they're not going to amount to that much ultimately, that their aspirations aren't there. So when you can, so it's quite, I think you have to be really sensitive when you're working with groups of marginalised people, because sometimes the money's given to the wrong people ultimately, and there's ego present, you know. And I think that if there was a person that was given money, like you were saying, that it should go directly to the community, not necessarily even the artist that's there. And for instance, the South London Gallery have a building called the Art Block, right? Yeah. They go, when they get their money, they say to the kids there, what do you want to spend it on? That's how it should be. And they don't have to explain it. One year they wanted to make a swimming pool in there. You know, why not?
The Art Block is amazing. I worked on the first one for the Art Block, and
great.
It was just, the kids were just so amazing, and they were really trying to get that transition where the little kids will all play with art, but when they get to 14, 15, instead of joining drug gangs and things like that, they carry on and then they can be artists. And I really do, South London Gallery are really, it's amazing about the Art Block.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, John. Again, it shows there's a stark difference between the sort of bottom-down approach to institutions and organisations looking at individuals, and then individuals looking up at institutions and organisations, when actually we're in an ecosystem with lots of constellations. I remember when I was first setting out, I sort of looked at all the organisations and the people that ran them, and I tried to map out a sort of ecosystem to sort of work out where my path might be. And I did that as someone, you know, not of much means and not of no kind of lineage within the arts. And I guess there aren't that many organisations that are looking at who are the freelancers and the artists of note or of promise, or who are emerging talent who could be part of our ecosystem. So I guess there needs to be more of that kind of circular constellations of mapping, I think, in order to have more equity. So I think, thank you so much for the contributions so far. I think we're going to open it up to the floor, and I think there's a roving mic going round. And so, does anyone have a question for the speakers? Yes, over there.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I'd like to ask a question to John, really, because you mentioned that you did some crime diversion stuff. Many years ago, I worked for the Home Office and visited lots of prisons, and sometimes the artwork in prisons were quite impressive. I remember seeing a guy who had done something really bad. He'd shot somebody who had tried to pull down a building that he put up in the wrong place, and he was in prison for a long time. And he used to paint very much in the style of Monet. And if Monet hadn't existed, he would have been Monet. So my question really is, how successful is your work in diverting people from the criminal justice system? Are you having an impact on reducing reoffending?
Great question. I am, but that doesn't mean that there are casualties in it as well. I do lose people that get recalled. Like in this current project, I've lost 2 people to being recalled. And even the way that system is set up, if you breach your license conditions and you get sent back to prison, that's quite a big percentage of our prison population, and our prison population is over 99% full right now. And something terrible will happen, like very soon. there are already several terrible things happening. But I'm fortunate in that the organisation I work with, they're called NACRO. They will get all of that information. Every day we ask the gentlemen that join us, but unfortunately you can't prove that these men aren't committing crimes. So how do you can only quantify through testimony, basically, in that respect, because of they might have just got better at evading capture. And that's what you kind of will be faced with. At the moment, I'm working quite a lot voluntarily because of, I want this play to be amazing because of next year, that funding isn't guaranteed. So if anybody wants to come to see a play in Stevenage on the 9th of July, am I allowed to do this? Oh, yeah. On the 9th of July, there's a play that's been written by a group of men called Something Inside, and I'm sure we'll be able to get the details to you somehow. But so my answer is, ultimately, there isn't really an easy way of doing that. It's through testimony because of, and I've had that problem for over a decade of trying to prove that these things work. There is enough literature to say that it does, and I had a meeting with Arts Council recently because we're trying to pair universities with prisons at the moment because of why isn't every prison a creative hub? Why every person I've spoken to, when you go to prison, you don't really see people getting better. You don't see the system making them better anyway. You see people taking control of their lives, often through finding a passion. And that being able to make art in a place like that where you can reinvent yourself and maybe at the end get some praise, which you probably haven't had for a very long time, that's when the stirrings might happen, and that's when you could maybe think that maybe I could contribute something. Whether it be a pretty picture or a nice poem, whatever it is, that could heal a relationship, which then, when you leave, maybe your family will let you stay under their roof, which then, would save money in the long run.
But don't you think with all these things, with evaluations, everybody wants it to be instant. And you could do like a workshop for a 6-year-old and then 20 years later they go to art school or something just because they went to that workshop. But at that time, they didn't, so I think with all these things, sometimes things have to embed in a lot longer. People have to find their own time and space for when that but what you've done is you've shown them another way of looking at things, another way of seeing things, and that sparked that, that thought process, isn't it? Which
that's what the art class can do in a prison, because most people in prison as well have had terrible experiences with education. So they go into an art room and they're already tense because they're in prison. And then if you put a sheet of paper in front of men that are in prison who are typically staring at each other's hands and worried that something might kick off, then that piece of paper becomes a vehicle for, a much calmer way of communicating and saying the unsayable. It's so powerful.
Thank you. Any other questions? We've got one.
Thank you. Morag, you mentioned the power of intergenerational relationships for reinforcing communities. I have a question in relation to society, on the role, not necessarily for you the question, but the role of art for breaking down silos across communities.
Breaking what, sorry?
Breaking down silos across communities.
Silos, Am I answering? Why don't you answer? You said it was for anybody. You could,
I could answer it from just in terms of Battersea, because one of the things that we're doing a lot of thinking about at the moment is that Battersea is in an old town hall that was built in the 1890s, and it has a long history of being a sort of place for radical thought and radical speech and radical politics, and the only ever communist MP in the UK's seat was at Battersea Town Hall. Suffragettes met at Battersea Town Hall. It has this wonderful, wonderful history to it. So when you're there as an arts centre, and we're just custodians of that place, you've got to sort of move into that space of our main performance space is the old council chamber, and it has the nays and the yays over the top of the door as the eyes and the nose as you go in. And so it's a place for debate. And so we have to sort of challenge ourselves all the time about how do you position yourself as an organisation which is there for creative expression and freedom of speech, and make sure that you're able to safely hold both sides of a debate, which is what the history of that building always was. And I think that's really difficult for an arts centre to do, really difficult, because in the main, there are groups of society that you naturally align with, many, and then there are groups in society that you naturally don't align with. And so as an organisation, how you navigate that, but I genuinely believe if you do it really carefully and with a lot of thought, and you bring voices from both, you know, and sorry, I'm really going off piece here, but I think you've got to pick your debates. Like, let's not try and solve absolutely everything all at once, but how might we come together to talk about a very specific issue in a way that's really well held, really well facilitated, and everybody gets listened to. And I think, I feel that buildings in particular have a role to play there, and that doesn't have to be a purpose-built arts building, but spaces in communities where people feel like they can come through the front door, they can buy a cup of coffee, and they can sit in a room and have a conversation. And so that, for me, just feels like, and I think more, personally, I feel like too many arts organisations will immediately step forward and side with something very particular, or sort of wear their heart on their sleeve. And what you're doing when you do that is actually you potentially excluding a whole raft of conversations that then get more and more siloed. You get more and more conflict, and actually I feel like arts institutions need to be the spaces where those things can happen, even though it's difficult.
Thank you, thank you. There was a hand at the back. Just here, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much to all the panelists and to Melanie for sharing so successfully. I wanted to ask a question in regards to the support for the grassroots organizations. One of the challenges, as you all said, was funding. And when we make the case about funding for the arts, for the sector in general, in the country, we always talk about how much the sector contributes to the economy, all these billions of pounds that we contribute, but we don't, I think, John, you touched a little bit about this, about the amount of people that volunteer work very lowly paid in the sector. So we hardly hear about them, and we are the ones who are actually making the sector function. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Well, I think as an artist, you're kind of never off the clock. So if I was to work out how much labour goes into certain projects, it would be less than minimum wage that I'm taking home. And there may be a consolation in loving what I do, but that doesn't kind of wash. You know, I should still be paid for the time that I put into the projects. But I guess I've tried to find sponsors and things like that, which has ended quite awkwardly, to be honest. I don't know. If I'm entirely honest, you know, I started my BA. I left prison in 2010, and I started my BA straight from prison. I actually had day release for my interview, and so I've been doing this for 15 years, and I'd say only in the last maybe 18 months has it actually made sense for me to do. The rest of the time, it's been passion projects, you know, and that idea of success, and then even peeking behind a red velvet curtain maybe, and seeing that maybe that's not what I want, because there's a lot of like I touched on before, there are people that get celebrated and bankrolled who make quite sort of time-stamped work, or like work that has a very like short trend, like an expiry date, that doesn't kind of that is just a luxury product. Ultimately, they seem to do really well. But I'm doing another project at the moment at Somerset House. I'm going to plug again. Sorry. That on the 8th of June there's an artist fair, and as part of the artist fair, I'm asking people to tell me what their issues are in the art world, and we're going to open up these ballot boxes that I have plotted around. and talk about that. I think one of the big problems is that on the surface, people want to look like it's okay, and not that they are. You know, I know people are skipping meals because of especially if you're living in London, it's not easy. You know, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, unfortunately. I think that I'm certainly not resigned to like this idea of the poor artist either. Like I'm not doing that. So somehow I find a way, and I've been very lucky that I grew up in London. I've got a support network here, so I could go and crash. But there were times when I'd have to go and crash at my mum's house and my brothers and things like that, and I've been really lucky in that sense. If I was from somewhere else, if I was from Birmingham and I came to London to study, I wouldn't have been able to sustain the art practice in the same way. I would have had a big percentage of my attention going towards earning money, that I could kind of live a lovely artist life for a bit. Well, not lovely, sort of, the tortured artist, whatever. I could do that poetic kind of life for a bit, but it doesn't last. Yeah.
Thank you, John. We've got one last question here. Okay, thank you.
I'm interested in this small pots of money to fund community initiatives. I mean, community chests are great, but the problem is we have a sort of like local authorities who aren't providing that money. It's local councils, that's been my experience in the past, who fund quality of life initiatives. As a sort of an action probably from this day, we need to be pressing local authorities to adequately fund quality of life initiatives.
Agree.
Agreed, no?
No, but I think it's a real, from in the 10 years that I was at ACE, the decline in local authorities, and not just about their money, but about the expertise they have in them as well. Oh, the amount of calls that we used to get and say, oh, Ipswich Council decided to move the arts department into the environmental department. And you're like, what? Why? Well, there's lots of expertise, and it's like, is there? About what? And just the sort of it always used to strike me that there was a lack of sort of facilitation in local authorities to understand how they could empower people in the communities who already knew what needed to be done to do those things by just giving them small pots of money, which in comparison to what they were having to spend on the bins and everything else would be really, really tiny and incredibly impactful. And you spend an awful lot of time at the Arts Council convincing local authorities to keep their money on the table. One of the things we used to say to them a lot was the ex-director of the South East. He was brilliant. We used to call it, he was like a used car salesman. He could convince anyone in a local authority that it was a really bad idea to cut their museum service. That was just his skill. And to watch him do it, but it was always based on, once you cut this, you will never get it back, because it has taken such a long time to build it that if you take it away, it will cost you, and he had the numbers, and it would frighten them, and it would be like, okay, let's just keep the money on the table for a little bit longer. But unless you've actually got bureaucrats and politicians and community leaders who are making that case all the time, it just falls away. It's so easy to cut. It's so easy to cut the arts, and it's not just the money, it's the people that deliver those roles who can make the best decisions about where the money should go that have just left local authority, and it's a crying shame.
Yeah, and when you're working with the local authority and the arts groups, if you don't, I worked on a project recently that I withdrew from because they did not believe, the council element did not believe in what we were doing, and they just kept on saying, I was going to do some, it was only colour thing, but with the community, and they said to me, no, if we don't like the colours, we're not going to use it. And I said, no, that's not the way it works, and they were like adamant, no. And I just thought, okay, so this is never going to, I have to withdraw from this because we're on totally, I can't, I would like to be able to change them, but I couldn't in the time. And so I think it really needs champions in each of the things to really, for us as artists to make things happen. Because then we give 120%. And I could feel with this, I'm not going to give you this, so I'm going to go
and then
from
there's
it.
also a huge risk, sorry, just to add to that, there's also a huge risk at the minute that there's so much conversation about cultural devolution. But if you, given where local authorities are now, if the money is now given back, there is no one in those local authorities who would know how to use it properly. And I think that's something we should all be really, really worried about, because if that becomes the mechanism for distributing cultural funding without some really good work on what that infrastructure now looks like after 20 years of cut, that could all, those sorts of things will just happen over and over again. I think, I would say you've got to look at the places where it's really working and try and replicate that again. Walthamstow, they've just opened Soho Walthamstow, and the support of the council has been absolutely incredible, and that's what's driven that kind of cultural regeneration there. And councils without people who know what they're doing, it won't work.
And Blackburn and Blackpool, and there's many, Rotherham, lots and lots of amazing places.
Thank you, Amy and Morag. And I think that sort of sums up as well also the value of the arts, and not forgetting that England, the UK, has traditionally and historically been such a champion and a preserver and an advocate for the arts, both in the past but also in the future, in terms of our kind of new diverse kind of culture as well, and what that presents. So we've come to the end of this event, and I want to thank you all for coming and showing interest through your questions and your responses. Thank you for being such a warm audience. Thanks to the RSA. I want to give a special thanks to Rachel Head, who created this rich programme and who's also supported me. I've been a fellow for over 10 years, and this is actually the first time I've been involved in an RSA event, which is lovely. The festival's going to be running throughout the day, so I encourage you to kind of look at the programme and attend other events and take part. And in closing, let's thank the speakers you've heard today. I've been your chair, Melanie Abrahams, and let's give thanks to our speakers, Morag Myerscough, John Costy and Amy Vaughan. Thank you.